Tip number 15. I knew that, like, the inverted pyramid was going to be rough. I feel like a lot of people, I call it hive mentality. So a lot of people, when it comes to, like, any big AAA release, because there are going to be, like, all the game journos and the people who are going to be like, oh, this is, like, the best game of the year. Like, I feel like everyone has a habit of just kind of, like, doing the same mentality of, oh, like, saying it's the best game in the world. So as not to be seen, like, you know, a contrarian or anything like that. And I feel like, again, every single video game kind of suffers from that to an extent. So like Tears of the Kingdom, Breath of the Wild. Yeah, like Tears of the Kingdom, Breath of the Wild. That sucked. Well, run number 16. I think I'm underestimating this run. Again, I kind of committed to this, so I'm doing it. But yeah, a lot of people tend like, yeah, Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom. I think other games like even like Elden Ring, Mario Odyssey, Mario Wonder. There are so many games that are like, oh yeah, a lot of people are hyping up the game. Like, it's just, again, it's a massive case of like hype mentality. Like a lot of people end up being like, oh yeah, this is like one of the best games. This is like one of the best games coming out this year. And then like everyone's like, oh yeah, this is like the best game coming out this year. So they don't end up sounding like they're contradicting anyone. Because again, if they sound different, then people are just going to frown upon them. And I feel like that's a really bad culture just in general. Because a lot of people then just end up being like, they'll say the game is amazing, even if they're not a fan of said game. Because you end up with a situation of, oh yeah, this game's like good, but is it like as amazing as people make it out to be? Like, obviously there are some situations where, yeah, the game is actually legitimately great, but it's not great in the way that, like, everyone else claims it is. Like, a lot of people do tend to be like, oh yeah, like, yeah, this game is, like, really good, but it's not as good as people. Again, I feel like Odyssey was a very lackluster game. I feel like, again, I have played every single 3D Mario game, and I mean all of them. Like, I played 64, I've played Sunshine, Galaxy, and Galaxy 2. I played 64 DS, and then also, like, 3D Land and 3D World. And I do think that Odyssey is like the weakest of all of those games, aside from maybe 3D Land, but like honestly, 3D Land is probably not that great to begin with anyway. But yeah, like I feel like a big issue with Odyssey is the lack of difficulty it has. That's like one of my biggest gripes with Odyssey is its difficulty, or like its lack thereof. I feel like the boss fights as well are also like really weak. The problem is like they really, one of the biggest things that holds Odyssey back is its actual main gimmick, which is captures. Because again, when you capture an enemy, and the captures I guess were meant to be like the replacement to power-ups for Mario, but then the problem is that because the movement is not, Mario is a lot about movement, and because Mario is very much a movement-oriented character, the fact that like you completely change how Mario moves is what ends up kind of hurting Mario in general. What hurts Odyssey in general. It's not even the fact that like the captures itself is a bad idea. It's the fact that like the captures in execution for the most part just don't end up working out very well. A lot of situations you're just like, oh yeah, like yeah, you use a capture specifically to get power moons, but like you're never gonna unironically use those captures. Now obviously there are some captures that are like the exception rather than the norm. The Gushen, probably one of the best captures in the entire game, because again, even though the movement may be pretty crappy, like when it comes to like land movement, like in the water and air movement, the Gushen's like a really fun mechanic, because again, like yeah, you have finite water ammo, but like as long as there's water, you can basically do it indefinitely, and that's what really ends up benefiting the Gushen, is it's super fun to move around in. Same thing with the Pokeo Bird. Like, the Pokeo Bird is really fun to move around in because you can Pokenos the wall, and you can actually travel, again, pretty quickly vertically, because the Pokeo has a really fun little mechanic that ends up actually rewarding the player for experimenting. I will say, the most disappointing transformation, a lot of people love to hype up the T-Rex as a really fun transformation. I personally dislike the T-Rex transformation, for once again, I don't like the movement of the T-Rex transformation at all, which is why the T-Rex transformation, for me, is like definitely lower down the list. But then you have a bunch of absolutely pointless filler captures that are just there for like 1 or 2 power moons, and that's it. You have like the manhole, again, the manhole cover in like New Donk City, you have the cactus, you have a tree, you have like a stone, and again, those captures are used for like 1 moon, but like you never want to be those transformations ever. Like, they're only used for that one power moon only. And again, you have to like capture them in order to 100% complete the game. And like 100% of completing the game once again is an absolute nightmare. You could argue, well, the games are not actually built for 100% completion. I feel like that should not be a quote-unquote excuse to just end up making the game painfully easy to any percent, but then making the game just incredibly tedious to 100% complete. I feel like when a lot of people end up just like, we just add padding and padding, it's actually kind of like the same mentality as why Crash 4, It's About Time, is one of the worst Crash Bandicoot games in terms of 100% completion. Yeah, I'd say like 4 to 5 hours of the game itself is actually incredibly fun. But then that's the thing, 4 to 5 hours of the game is incredibly fun. And even I'll admit that Crash 4 is actually quite a fun little game. What I don't like about Crash Bandicoot 4, however, is the fact that you have to like only enjoy the 4 hours. The problem with It's About Time is that the 100% completion aspect is some of the worst 100% completion criteria in any video game ever. The main reason is twofold. The first one is that Platinum Relics are compulsory for 100% completion. The second reason is that the Insanely Perfect Relic is mandatory for completion. And like, if the Insanely Perfect Relic and the Platinum Relics were just like a bragging rights reward, like again, that was totally optional, then yeah, I could totally understand like skipping it. The problem is that you have to get those 2 relics in order to complete the game. And not to mention that the completion reward is ever worth it anyway. You literally just get a cutscene saying Uka Uka returns, and that's it. Like, it's literally just like an 11-second cutscene that you can just look up on the internet, which is just not worth it. I mean, everyone knows, like, they're not just gonna, like, kill off Uka Uka. Like, that's just never gonna happen. That's never gonna happen. Like, Uka Uka's never gonna be killed off as like, an overall antagonist. Like, yeah, even though Dr. Neo Cortex may be the quote-unquote bad guy of the Crash Bandicoot series, Uka Uka is kind of like, for the most part, the one calling the shots. And yeah, they kill off Uka Uka within like the first cutscene, but like everyone knew, yeah, he ain't staying dead. Like, there's just no way he's staying dead. Again, a lot of people were really bummed out by the completion reward. I didn't go out my way to 100% complete the game because obvious reasons. It shouldn't be absolute bullshit to try and 100% complete. Again, if Insanely Perfect Relics and Platinum Relics were not compulsory for completion, so like, if the compulsory completion criteria was like all the gems and then like gold relics, and then they just kind of like ditched the inverted levels, that's another thing. Inverted levels can just absolutely go burn, in my opinion, because like inverted levels, for the most part, it's just a cosmetic filter, and it's just a very similar level. You have to replay like every level twice, essentially, if you're doing 100% completion. One of the most annoying parts is the fact that like it has its own criteria for completion, meaning, okay, every single inverted level has its own set of 6 gems, and that's what really kind of like holds back the game. The fact that inverted levels are essentially compulsory to completing a game is what seriously holds the game back, because you're just essentially playing through the same level twice. The fortunate part is that you only have to do is that Insanely Perfect Relics only apply to like one of the levels. Insanely Perfect Relics only apply to like either the main level or inverted level. You do not have to do both, but you do have to do the Platinum Relics specifically in the normal levels, because again, like there are some mechanics on the inverted level which would make the Platinum Relics like again very in difficulty, and I think the reason why they don't have Platinum Relics is because then, like, the snacks dimension, everything is like water physics. So like, imagine playing through a level, but even slower. Imagine playing through an entire level, but even slower. That's like the last thing you want. But then like the run it by you level or whatnot is in like fast mode. So again, that would end up kind of making it really, really easy, because you would just like, again, with the fast mode level, they would have to like adjust the amount of time to do like the platinum, again, the Platinum Relics. I only get the Platinum Relic if it wasn't like absolutely crap to do so. And like, unfortunately, there are some Platinum Relics that are just absolutely miserable to try and get. Again, like, you have Platinum Relics in like Crash Bandicoot Warped, which are like insanely hard to get. Like, I did go out my way to try and get like every single Platinum Relic in Warped. Yeah, like the motorcycle levels in particular, like, what was it, I think it's called Hog Ride or Hog, I don't know what it's called, but like the first one in particular was absolutely hellish to try and get. I remember like the first one was just an absolute downright nightmare to get. and I didn't like it. That took me like over an hour to get because again, like the timer is just again so extremely tight, leaving like no room for error at all. Like again, you literally have to do everything like flawlessly, whereas some platinum relics give you like a little bit of a small amount of margin for error. Again, those platinum, like you still have to do it like again optimally. Again, you can't screw up, but again, it's not like it's not as needle precision tight as like Crash Bandicoot 4's platinum relics. And don't even get me started on the purple relic. Thank God the purple relic, like yeah, some of the purple relics are just absolutely downright unforgiving, but really the thankful part is that they're the dev times and are completely optional for completion. Like you don't have to go out your way to get them. Now honestly, like I don't know if like anyone's gonna play through like the entirety 100% Crash Bandicoot 4 and make like in their rule set purple relics compulsory. I could never imagine myself ever doing that ever. I would absolutely, I would hate myself after that, like for sure. Again, like purple relics, you would just be sitting there like trying to like nail the time, and then it's like, oh haha, no, you're just like half a millisecond off. I like Rapid Cortex because the relic times are pretty generous. I will say like Rapid Cortex, the monkey bar sections are always gonna suck. I think Rapid Cortex is my favorite Crash Bandicoot game, but even I will admit that just screw the whole monkey bar sections, especially Droid Void. Droid Void is an absolutely horrible level to have to like play through to do the relic run. The first minute is essentially just a compulsory monkey bar section. I feel like the generous part is that you can bring Aku Aku crates in, but yeah, like the fact that like Aku Aku himself can be kind of carried in can actually make some levels a lot more bearable than one might expect. I like Warped, but I feel like one thing that Warped really kind of like butchered, the medieval levels in Warped are just really bad. I much prefer like the castle levels in Rapid Cortex because it does the whole ancient medieval theme a lot more justice compared to Crash Warped. I feel like Crash Warped, again, Crash Bandicoot, I like the Egyptian theme levels, I like the future theme levels. I think the Egyptian and future theme levels are like the two I really like. My favorite level in the game is Tomb Waiter because it still has kind of a unique gimmick to this day in the whole like rising and falling water tides. And then there's also the future levels. I'm a really big fan of like the future levels as well because I think the future levels are really well designed and I like the whole like design of it. More specifically, I've only played the Insane Trilogy version of Warped, so I don't know whether that's like any better or any different or any better or worse compared to like the original, because again, I never grew up with the PlayStation 1 version of Warped. I grew up with the PS1 version of Cortex Strikes Back, but I never grew up with the PS1 version of Warped or the first game. I know that the first game is like really punishing because Crash Bandicoot 1 in the original, to save a game, you had to like beat a Torna bonus level. The Torna levels were required for save, so you couldn't save whenever. You had to beat a Torna level. But not to mention that like the perfect runs, you have to perfect run every single level in order to like 100% complete the game. And that's like the one thing that really holds back the game specifically. They make sense for the color gems, they don't make sense for like the colorless gems. I mean, between Cortex Strikes Back and Warped, I'm more of a Crash Bandicoot Warped kind of person. One of my biggest pet peeves for Cortex Strikes Back is the fact that they have the split paths. The split paths are like the one thing about Cortex Strikes Back I absolutely despise from like the original Crash Bandicoot games. Again, the fact that basically like you have to like travel all the way down path A, and then after traveling down path A, you have to essentially go out of your way, then like you have to backtrack all the way down that path with a very wonky ass camera. And then like once you've backtracked all the way down there, and oftentimes like there's no reusable checkpoints in Crash Bandicoot, so reusable checkpoints aren't a thing. So you can't even like, oh yeah, like, that was actually kind of a good run. I'm actually kind of annoyed. You don't get the luxury of a reusable checkpoint that you can use, which I think, in my opinion, the Crash Bandicoot 2 levels that don't have the split path levels are genuinely really, really fun, in my opinion. I don't like the levels that do the split path multiple times. I don't like the level in Crash Bandicoot 1, the lab level where you have to do multiple split paths. I don't like that at all. I hated that level because the camera was just so horribly awkward to try and see. You can't really like see behind you essentially, and that's what ended up really hurting it a lot, those kind of levels. I'm okay with chase levels because again, they at least like have a fairly generous camera, but I don't like the split path levels. I do not like them at all. There's a lot of like really good levels that otherwise just end up being butchered in quality because you have an awkward split path in them that like nobody asked for. So my favorite level for like each Crash Bandicoot game, I mean, Crash Bandicoot 1, I think Sunset Vista is like one of like my favorite levels. Or actually, no, scrap that. My favorite level is Toxic Waste, mostly just because of like the theme tune. In Cortex Strikes Back, I like the early levels like Turtle Woods and whatnot. I don't like the Rocket Pack levels. I'm not the most avid fan of those ones. I think the sewer levels are kind of like pipeline levels are like my favorite. Oh yeah, I also don't like the level where you get like the mud and then you got like the freaking bees. And then for Crash Bandicoot Warped, I'm just having, again, the Egyptian levels. I'm a really big fan of those. And then like, again, I think the motorcycle levels I don't like in Crash Bandicoot Warped. If you end up messing up a turn and you don't break a crate, you have to essentially restart the whole level by either like Xing it out and re-entering. You do not get the opportunity to end up just kind of like, oh, go down a bottomless pit and then just you get to restart the level. Crash Bandicoot Rapid Cortex does give you that luxury in the level Smokey and the Bandicoot. Even if people can kind of universally agree that the Jeep is complete arse, there's no denying that, like, if you're trying to get all the box crates to get the gem in the level, that the ability to just drive down a bottomless pit and kill yourself is, again, a really useful thing you can do. Again, I don't like Smokey and the Bandicoot, but at least, like, the box gem in that level is, quote-unquote, bearable, unlike getting the box crate in Warped, because you have to do it in such an awkward manner. I also think Prehistory, being the chase theme level, is kind of like, eh. What I like about Rapid Cortex is how every single level ties into one of Neo Cortex's or the other antagonist's goals. For example, like, again, Eskimo Roll, like, is a research facility. All the Cortex Castle levels are, like, experiments and whatnot, Golifield Death Traps. And I feel like Crash and Burn is a erupting volcano due to the influence of both Rocco and Pyro. You know, the Forbidden Elemental Monsters are actually out to try and dispose of you for good. And I feel like the fact that every level is kind of like influenced by the elemental masks in some way or another. But yeah, I think the fact that every single one kind of ties into a overarching plot is what kind of like improves my enjoyment of the game. And I also do like the fact that you have like an overarching boss in Crunch Bandicoot. Again, I feel like it's a lot more interesting to have an overarching like antagonist whose sole purpose is basically, is supposed to be what Crash Bandicoot was supposed to be initially. And again, like, it's like Crash is like fighting himself as a like genetically modified Super Bandicoot with only the goal of like basically helping fulfill Cortex's ambitions. I think Rapid Cortex is definitely very much an overhated game. The same of which cannot be said for Twinsanity. I think Twinsanity is actually kind of a rubbish game. That game was clearly not intended to be released when it released. I feel like Twinsanity was massively rushed. But yeah, I think Rapid Cortex is overhated. A lot of people prefer Twinsanity over Rapid Cortex. I think Rapid Cortex is the better of the two games, more so because like Twinsanity was just rushed out the door, unfortunately. I feel like if Twinsanity and Rapid Cortex had more time in the oven, those two games definitely would have been like something truly special. But again, the problem lies in Universal Studios. Back then, Universal Game Studios was an absolutely horrible game company to work under, because they would just like insist that the company has to like pump out a new game every year. Like, apparently, like, Rapid Cortex was developed in like less than a year. The fact that they were able to, you know, develop a fully functional PlayStation 2 game in under a year and then not have the game absolutely brick the PS2 or anything like that is kind of a miracle in and of itself. Yeah, sure, the game is definitely unpolished, but like, the thing is, like, it's got fun quirks that make the game fun to play even today. Not to mention, I think Rapid Cortex has some of the best music in the entire franchise as well. I think the soundtrack is also like very, very good for like original PS2 songs. The soundtrack is very good by Crash Bandicoot standards and has no reason to be as good as it does. Not to mention, like, the first 5 levels of Rapid Cortex are also like phenomenal quality. I really like the first handful of levels of Rapid Cortex, in my opinion. I think they're some, like, again, they don't have like any of the traps of the like other Crash Bandicoot games. They don't have the split path, so it's all like a linear route. Not to mention, to get the box gems, again, there's a death route and like two of the levels in Wizards and Lizards and Arctic Antics. They have a fun little vehicle level, and then obviously they have like Atmosphere levels. And again, the Atmosphere levels I think are like the highest point of Rapid Cortex by a country mile. I think it's very disappointing that they never like brought that back in the later Crash Bandicoot games. Like Crash Bandicoot 4, It's About Time does have an Atmosphere section in it, but it's not really an Atmosphere section. It's a chase section in like a metal ball. You can't build up momentum like the Atmosphere. It's just essentially, oh, you can't jump. That's the gimmick. It's a chase section where you can't jump. If they ended up just bringing back Atmosphere levels fully, I feel like that could have been something truly special. I think, yeah, the Atmosphere levels, yeah, they should have been brought back 100%. I think the second boss fight in Rapid Cortex, in my opinion, I think it's like the hardest one in the game. But then I think the third, I think the other bosses were way easier in comparison. Like the third boss, I do like how every single Crunch boss utilizes the elemental mask in a capacity and also has like an overarching gimmick. Crunch's first battle is an Atmosphere battle. The second battle is just like general platforming. The third level is a kind of chase level, and then the fourth level is a vehicle boss fight. So to make every single boss fight at least kind of distinct enough to kind of stand out from one another. The fifth one, once again, is kind of general platforming. I do think some of the bonus levels are really good though. I will say Ghost Town, the fact that you can literally beat the whole level by just like not touching a single button input, it's kind of like, why did they not properly playtest that? But yeah, in my opinion, I think Rapid Cortex is definitely unpolished. I think it's also like massively overhated. Like a lot of people love to like over-exaggerate the bad and not like look at the good. And I feel like that's the thing with a lot of video games in general, is a lot of people love to like be like, this game sucks, therefore it's like the worst game ever, and then like not bother actually looking at what the game actually did really good. They don't look at what good the game did, and they only look at the bad. And I feel like that's a very negative outlook on just gaming as a whole. I feel like it's better to like weigh what a game does well and what it doesn't do well, and then not necessarily just like for its time, just in general, properly evaluate a video game. Because a lot of people love to end up just kind of like, this game sucks because a game came out like 15 years later and did the same thing but better. And I feel like I find that really annoying. Like a lot of people love to compare some older games to newer games that like took the base foundation and improved upon it. Like, yeah, sure, for like a 1996 game, it's going to be different mechanically than a game that's released later. Like, yeah, they may play very, very similar to the point of almost being the same, just that one of the games is newer with like better graphics and whatnot. But at the same time, the older game can still be considered a fun game, even if it does kind of get overshadowed by its successor. Because again, just because someone releases like the brand new game doesn't mean that the older game is instantly obsolete. I feel like a lot of people then are like, why play this older game when you got all these newer games? And the reason why is because, you know, the older games actually have a more unique feel to them. Old can feel relatively enjoyable to play, and I feel like a lot of people don't realize that. I feel like also a lot of people are kind of hesitant to play a lot of older games because the older games are very different design-wise to how they're used to. So a lot of people will be like, oh, like, why would I play this old game when I can just kind of play this new game which does, you know, this but slightly better? And the reason why is this, I feel like a lot of people tend to also kind of like underestimate how much time goes into game development. A lot more time goes into game development than one might ever truly expect. Again, game development back in the day took like, again, you know, it still took like a few years, like 2 or 3 years. But then you're also taking into account you're developing for like less powerful hardware. A lot of people forget that a lot of modern AAA games take several years to develop because they have to like do it, like have to like check so many different things to make sure to run. But then like sometimes they will just release the game half finished and then just kind of release an update patch later, and I don't like when game companies do that at all. I think that's like one of the worst aspects of video gaming you can do. A lot of people are kind of hesitant to try something different as well. Again, there's a quote in Pokemon Horizons: the first step will always be scary, but once you get past that first step, it's not as scary. The scariest part is that first step. And I feel like that's a really good quote. With anything, like, you can be scared of, like, again, like, trying this new video game you're unfamiliar with. You can be scared of, like, a specific activity because, again, you know nothing about that activity. Again, that activity is going to be scary simply because, again, you don't know anything about it. And because you don't know anything about it, that's why it's so scary. I knew that was gonna happen. I absolutely knew that was gonna happen. I just want to take a drill with me. Again, a lot of people are scared. Like, again, I was kind of hesitant on trying like Fortnite. I tried it to see if I was like gonna enjoy it. And then it turns out that, yeah, like, I played it for a handful of games. I didn't enjoy Fortnite, but then I feel like, well, at least I tried, and at least now I know that that kind of gameplay is not for me. And I learned about that. Battle Royale shooters are not my kind of jam. And because I went out of my way to, you know, find out about that, I know now that, like, with Battle Royale shooters, I'm probably not going to enjoy them. I've played different genres. I've never been a fan of horror games. I absolutely detest horror games. For me, horror games and myself have, like, zero compatibility. Battle Royale games, I'm not a big fan of. I'm very compatible with, like, well-designed 3D platformers. Again, 3D platformers are definitely very much a thing I invest in a lot. What was that? There's not just platformers, but like other like racing games, adventure games as well, like Ocarina of Time. I love Ocarina of Time. I think Ocarina of Time holds up incredibly well to this day. A lot of people do tend to be like, Ocarina of Time is like bad because the water temple is bad. I don't think the water temple in the original is anywhere near as bad as everyone makes it out to be. I can understand why having to pause the menu and then scroll to the right window to swap to the iron boots, like in and out of the iron boots, can be annoying. Like, I can totally understand why people would find that to be very irritating. But for me, I never had a problem with that. And in fact, honestly, I still don't have a problem because I tend to be like fairly patient in video games. I like kind of taking my time. Again, taking the time to go in the menu and like swap out some boots was never a thing that I thought was like a personal problem. Like, obviously, yeah, a lot of people had a problem with doing the whole, like, going into the menu and swapping in the boots on and off again. Like, obviously, yeah, there are people who have that issue. I was never that person. It's also the reason why I like the Dark Link fight. Yeah, it's hard, but like, again, because I like exploring, I got the Big Goron sword, and the Big Goron sword absolutely makes that fight so much easier. But then one thing is that, like, if you've gone out your way to get like a ton of health, then Dark Link just takes longer because he has the same amount of health as you. So the more health you have, the more health he has. In the original release of Ocarina of Time, you could actually use like Din's Fire and a Megaton Hammer to kind of just completely break the entire boss fight. Because in Ocarina of Time, if you use the Megaton Hammer on him in the original release of Ocarina of Time, Dark Link does not shield for the rest of the fight. Again, it just kind of completely breaks his AI. Din's Fire can be used to like deal lots of cheap damage to him if you've gone out your way to get Din's Fire. And then like Big Goron's sword is like probably like the best thing you can use against him. Yeah, I think my favorite dungeon in Ocarina of Time, I love the Forest Temple, but I also love the Spirit Temple. The only dungeon I've absolutely despised is the Fire Temple. That is the only dungeon I just do not like in general, either in the original release for Ocarina of Time and the Master Quest version. I've never been a fan of that dungeon ever. For me, Water Temple has never been that bad. I think I like atmospheric dungeons especially. I think Water Temple was really fun. But I'd say my other favorite dungeon is the Spirit Temple. I really love the Spirit Temple as a dungeon. I think the Spirit Temple is definitely up there as like my second favorite dungeon in Ocarina of Time. I also do like the fact that it incorporates both child and adult Link mechanics in that dungeon. Like, you cannot end up beating the dungeon with just like one form of Link. I also do like Ocarina of Time for the fact that like some of the dungeons can actually be kind of done out of order. So like you can end up like, if you have Ferori's Wind, you can actually do the entirety of Water Temple before the Forest Temple, provided you know where to use Ferori's Wind. Because Ferori's Wind allows you to set like a respawn point. And yeah, you can just kind of use Ferori's Wind. And again, it allows you to kind of like do some kind of sequence jumping you shouldn't be able to do otherwise. So Fire Temple can be done 100% without the bow, since the only thing the bow is required for is actually just a dungeon map. Now, obviously, it's probably not recommended because the fairy bow at least can be useful against the Volvagia boss fight. You use a Megaton Hammer to stun Volvagia, but then the bow can be used to like hurt her main body when she's flying around. It's recommended to kind of do Forest Temple before the Fire Temple at least to get the bow. There's only really, I think, like 2 main stipulations for like the non-linearity of a dungeon. Spirit Temple must always be done after the Water Temple, since you require the long shot. While you do not need the Lens of Truth to get through the Haunted Wasteland, it's extremely painful to do so without the Lens of Truth, because the Lens of Truth allows you to kind of see the Ghost Guide for the Haunted Wasteland, which allows you to kind of get through the Desert Colossus. Oh, I think you also have to do the Forest Temple, because you can't actually go back as Child Link until you beat the Forest Temple, since the Forest Temple actually unlocks the ability to go back to Child Link era, or at least I think that's how it works. Yeah, Forest Temple is required to unlock the ability to go back to the past. The Water Temple is required to be beaten to be able to access the Spirit Temple, since you require the long shot. Beating the Forest Temple is necessary to unlock backtracking, but then you don't need to beat the Water Temple, but you do need the long shot. And by that point, you may as well just like beat the Spirit Temple anyway. And then to unlock the cutscene where you unlock Shadow Temple, you have to end up beating the first 3 temples, because otherwise the cutscene where Bongo Bongo damages the village just doesn't play. Again, so Forest, Fire, and Water Temple can kind of be like done out of order, and then like Shadow and Spirit Temple then can be done out of order. But then also, what I've always done is I've always gone out my way to do Spirit Temple before Shadow Temple. I get the Lens of Truth, and then what I do is I end up beelining it to the Haunted Wastelands, so I can just kind of like end up getting Silver Gauntlets, then doing the Gerudo Training Grounds, and completing all of that just to get the Ice Arrows. And that's a thing I've always done every single time I played Ocarina of Time, because again, the Ice Arrows just make Bongo Bongo actually a lot more fun to do. You freeze one hand, essentially stun locking him. It just makes him really easy. With the Bigoron Sword, you can actually defeat Bongo Bongo in like under a minute. He's like one of the hardest fights in the game, and then you can just kind of completely cheese the fight by just going out your way to do Ice Arrows, which I like when games do that. They reward you for exploring. I would be open to playing Ocarina of Time, but like I probably wouldn't do that as a short stream form. I would probably do that more as like a long stream form. That way, when people want to, if people want to chat, then at least what I can do then is I can like chat to others then. Yeah, I think Majora's Mask. I've always been a Majora's Mask kind of guy. Personally, I think Majora's Mask is a lot more enjoyable to me than Ocarina of Time. More so because, like, Majora's Mask, the world just kind of feels a bit more alive. It's kind of the same reason why I really like Wind Waker. All the characters in Wind Waker just have so much more personality compared to, like, Ocarina of Time. Like, obviously, yeah, I'm not saying that Ocarina of Time characters don't have personality, but the fact that characters, have their own personal lives that are dictated by time of day is really cool. Yeah, that's, like, the one thing I really like about Wind Waker. I also love with Wind Waker how you can do, like, the whole figurine side quest. I always 100% complete Wind Waker because I love going out my way to get all the different figurines personally. That's always kind of been a thing I've really enjoyed. And then with Majora's Mask, I always like trying to get every single mask. That way then, like, I get the Fierce Deity mask. Each Zelda game kind of does something different, I feel like. I think Twilight Princess is kind of the exception because it really tried to like copy a lot of Ocarina of Time's success, and it kind of shows in the final product. Twilight Princess is just like Ocarina of Time but for Wii, in my opinion. I've always kind of gotten that feeling because a lot of like the level design again is like big and open. Like Wind Waker tried something different by doing like an ocean. Majora's Mask tried something different by having the whole 3-day cycle, and then Skyward Sword tried doing something different by like making all of the overworld feel like pseudo dungeons. Every single area in Skyward Sword felt like a bit of a pseudo dungeon. There was always kind of that puzzle element, if that makes sense. That's what I really liked about Skyward Sword. It made items you get in dungeons relevant outside of the dungeons you get them in. Same thing with kind of like Wind Waker, the grappling hook and Deku Leaf, and then like the boomerang, and they're also kind of like completely revamped as well. So like the boomerang can now target like multiple enemies, which was carried over the Twilight Princess because again it was such an interesting mechanic. And then you could also like manually target enemies, which led to some kind of like more interesting puzzles. And then you have like the grappling hook. The grappling hook could be used to steal items from enemies. And then the Deku Leaf. I think the Deku Leaf was also kind of a really fun little power up. Because even like Twilight Princess, I think one of the big criticisms of Twilight Princess, the items aren't really useful outside the dungeon you get them in. The Gale Boomerang is used for the wind-based puzzles in the Forest Temple, and then to end up cooling off the carriage when you're doing the whole infamous defend the carriage escort mission that everyone really likes. I can assure you, that is a mechanic that everyone loves. But no, in all seriousness, that mechanic is absolute garbage. They're glad they got rid of it. Like, I'm glad it was only like one section in the whole game that actually necessitated that. But then if you're talking about like the items that are actually unique, or at least like relatively unique, unfortunately there's not a whole lot of items that are like useful outside the dungeon you get them in, essentially. So like you get this spinner from the Arbiter's Grounds. I feel like the spinner had way more potential, and then they just decided not to do anything more with it. It's used to grind on rails and to spin circular switches, but then they don't do anything else with it. I mean, yeah, it does make for a good boss fight in Star Lord, at least the second section. Again, it could have been like something akin to, oh, you travel faster, but at the expense of the ability to turn. It could have been a really cool way of traveling. You travel super fast, but then like you steer like a bus, or like even, oh, you can use the bow with it as well, or something like that. Just anything, and then like it's completely useless outside of what it's intended for. Skyward Sword, once again, it kind of like learned from Twilight Princess. Every single dungeon item you get is useful in some form or capacity outside of a dungeon you get it in. The beetle is useful when you get outside. I mean, you get the slingshot. Even like the slingshot is kind of useful, like, god damn it, F. Well, you've reached the end of this video, so why not like the video and leave a comment, as it helps out the channel a lot. And make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on the next video. Also, follow me on Twitter and Twitch, as I post daily on Twitter and I stream all this content live on Twitch. Links are in the description below. But for now, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a lovely day.